The results are positive. Doctor, take this, make sure she get pregnant. I want her to carry my child.
Sir, nothing will happen to you. I already prepared your lunch.
Don't worry, what will be will be.
The sick billionaire's promise, a maid, a miracle, and a legacy of love. The poor final year student. In his final year at the University of Ibadan, Adewale Thompson was known among his classmates as a quiet young man with an unusual fire burning inside him. He was intelligent, disciplined, and full of ideas, yet painfully poor. While others worried about final year projects and graduation photos, Adewale worried about food, transport fare, and where he would sleep when school closed. His clothes were always clean but worn. His shoes had been repaired more times than he could remember. Still, he carried himself with dignity, refusing to beg or complain. Lecturers admired his brilliance, often telling him, "Young man, you will go far." Adewale believed them, not because life was kind to him, but because he had no other choice but to believe. He survived on scholarships, small tutorials, and occasional help from friends. Many nights, hunger kept him awake as he stared at the ceiling of his cramped hostel room, imagining a future where his name would matter. He dreamed of success, not for luxury, but for security, a life where he would never be ashamed to love or be loved. During this time, he had only one source of emotional comfort: Kimmy, the woman he had dated since his first year. She was his confidence, his motivation, and the reason he believed the struggle would one day be worth it. When things got tough, Adewale reminded himself that he wasn't alone, or so he thought. But beneath his quiet determination, life was already preparing him for a lesson that would harden his heart and redirect his destiny forever. 5 years of love. Kimmy came into Adewale's life during his first year in the university, at a time when everything still felt possible. She was lively, outspoken, and full of dreams of her own. Where Adewale was quiet and observant, Kimmy was expressive and confident. Together, they balanced each other. Their love grew slowly but deeply. For 5 years, they walked the campus side by side, attending lectures, sharing notes, and sitting under trees discussing the future. Adewale spoke of businesses he would build, problems he wanted to solve, and the kind of man he hoped to become. Kimmy listened, encouraged him, and often reminded him of how smart and determined he was. But love in the university was not always romantic. There were days when Adewale could not afford transport, and Kimmy had to trek with him under the hot Ibadan sun. There were weekends when his pocket was empty, and they shared one plate of food. Kimmy would sometimes joke about it, but deep inside, the strain was beginning to show. Still, Adewale believed in suffering together. To him, those hard times were temporary. He was convinced that after graduation, things would change quickly. He studied hard, worked harder, and constantly reassured Kimmy, "Just manage with me now. Our tomorrow will be better." For a long time, she believed him. But as final year approached, reality became louder. Friends around Kimmy began receiving job offers, traveling abroad, or getting engaged to men with visible prospects. Slowly, comparison crept into her heart. The dreams Adewale spoke of still sounded distant, uncertain. She loved him, but fear was beginning to replace hope. Adewale, blinded by love and faith in the future, did not notice the growing distance. To him, those 5 years meant loyalty, patience, and a promise that nothing could break them apart. He didn't know that love, no matter how strong, sometimes collapses under the weight of uncertainty. And unknowingly, their story was already approaching the moment that would change Adewale's life forever. The day she walked away. The day Kimmy decided to leave Adewale did not begin like a tragedy. The sun rose as usual over the University of Ibadan. Students hurried to lectures, and life moved on, unaware that a heart was about to break. Kimmy asked Adewale to meet her that evening. Her voice on the phone was calm, almost distant. Adewale, thinking nothing of it, went to the familiar spot near the mango tree where they had spent countless evenings together. When she arrived, he immediately sensed something was wrong. She avoided his eyes. Her smile was forced. Silence stretched between them longer than normal. Finally, she spoke. Ade, we need to talk. Those 4 words made his heart pound. Kimmy took a deep breath and began to speak, slowly, carefully, as though choosing each word to hurt him less. You are a good man. You're intelligent, kind, and hardworking. But love alone is not enough. Adewale laughed nervously, thinking she was joking, but her face remained serious. I've waited. I've tried. But I don't see things changing anytime soon. I don't want to suffer after school. I want stability. I want a life I can see. Each sentence landed like a slap. Adewale tried to defend himself. He spoke of his plans, his dreams, the sacrifices he was making. He reminded her of the 5 years they had shared, the promises they made to each other. But Kimmy shook her head. Dreams don't pay bills, Ade. Hope doesn't guarantee success. Then she said the words that destroyed him completely. I'm leaving. Tears filled her eyes, but her decision was firm. She stood up, picked her bag, and walked away, leaving Adewale seated under the mango tree, staring at a future that suddenly felt empty. He did not chase her. He couldn't. That night, Adewale walked alone through the campus until dawn. His chest felt heavy, his mind numb. 5 years of love ended in a single conversation. It was not just Kimmy that left him that day. His innocence left. His belief in unconditional love left. And in its place, something colder and harder began to grow. A pain that would soon turn into a promise, a vow that would shape the rest of his life. The vow. That night, sleep refused to come. Adewale lay on his narrow hostel bed, staring at the cracked ceiling, replaying Kimmy's words again and again. I don't see things changing anytime soon. Each time the sentence echoed in his mind, it cut deeper. By midnight, the hostel was quiet. The laughter of students had faded, leaving only the sound of distant generators and his own heavy breathing. Adewale sat up, buried his face in his hands, and finally let the tears flow. He cried for the years he had invested. He cried for the future he had imagined. He cried for the shame of being left because he had nothing. For the first time in his life, Adewale felt truly powerless. But as the night dragged on, his tears slowly dried. In their place came anger, not the loud, violent kind, but a cold, focused rage. He began to think deeply, questioning everything he had believed about love, sacrifice, and loyalty. If love can leave because of poverty, he thought, then poverty must be defeated first. Just before dawn, Adewale stood up, walked to the small window, and looked out at the dark sky slowly turning gray. In that quiet moment, he spoke aloud, not to anyone else, but to himself. I will never allow a woman into my life again until I become a billionaire. The words felt heavy, but also empowering. No distractions, no emotions, no weakness, he continued. I will build myself first. Let success speak for me. It was not a vow made out of hatred for women, but one born from pain and self-protection. Adewale believed that wealth would shield him from heartbreak, from rejection, from shame. As the sun rose, he wiped his face, packed his books, and prepared for class. To the world, he looked the same, calm, focused, determined. But inside him, something had changed forever. The boy who believed love could survive anything was gone. In his place stood a young man driven by a single purpose, to rise, no matter the cost. And with that vow, Adewale unknowingly set himself on a path that would test him in ways he could never have imagined. Homeless, but unbroken, life after graduation did not reward Adewale's determination immediately. Instead, it tested him harder than ever. With no job waiting and no family wealth to fall back on, Adewale stepped into the real world carrying nothing but his certificate and the vow he had made to himself. The city was harsh. Rent was expensive. Opportunities were scarce. Promises from people vanished as quickly as they were made. Within his first year after school, Adewale lost his accommodation. He moved from one friend's place to another, overstaying his welcome not because he wanted to, but because he had no choice. When excuses ran out, he slept in unfinished buildings, security posts, and once, inside a small shop after the owner locked up for the night. He bathed at public taps, washed his clothes secretly at dawn, and learned how to survive without dignity breaking him. Many nights, hunger twisted his stomach painfully. Sometimes, all he had for the day was bread and sachet water. Other times, nothing at all. Yet each morning, he still woke up early, dressed neatly, and went out in search of opportunities. Rejection became his daily companion. He attended interviews where recruiters barely glanced at his CV. He trusted people who betrayed him. He invested in small businesses that failed without warning. At one point, he lost his entire savings to a fraudulent deal that promised quick returns. When he realized he had been scammed, he sat on the roadside and laughed bitterly at himself. Anyone else would have given up, but Adewale didn't. Each failure hardened his resolve. Each humiliation reminded him of the vow he had made under that hostile roof. When exhaustion threatened to overwhelm him, he whispered to himself, "This is not the end of my story." He refused to return to campus as a failure. He refused to beg Kimmy or anyone else for help. Pride was all he had left, and he guarded it fiercely. Even in homelessness, Adewale was unbroken, because deep within him burned a stubborn belief. One day, this pain would make sense, and though he could not see it yet, life was slowly shaping him for a future far bigger than the suffering he was enduring. 15 years of hustle. The journey from survival to success did not happen overnight. It took 15 long, grinding years of sacrifice, patience, and relentless hustle. After countless failures, Adewale finally caught a small break. A contract job in a logistics firm gave him his first taste of structure and steady income. It wasn't glamorous, but it taught him discipline, negotiation, and the harsh realities of business. He observed everything, asked questions, and learned faster than anyone expected. From logistics, he moved into oil servicing, starting from the lowest level. The work was demanding, the environment ruthless, but Adewale thrived under pressure. He saved aggressively, lived far below his means, and reinvested every naira he earned. While others chased comfort, he chased knowledge. There were setbacks, market crashes, bad partnerships, government policies that wiped out months of progress. Some years felt like wasted effort, but each loss came with lessons that sharpened his instincts. By his mid-30s, Adewale made his boldest move yet. He entered the energy and real estate sectors simultaneously. Many warned him he was taking too much risk, but Adewale trusted his experience and research. Slowly, his investments began to pay off. Contracts grew larger. His name started opening doors. By the time Adewale turned 42, the same world that once ignored him now sought his attention. His companies expanded across states. His net worth crossed figures he once could not even imagine. He had done it. Adewale Thompson was officially a billionaire. Yet, as he stood in his glass-walled office overlooking the city skyline, there was no celebration in his heart, no woman by his side, no family waiting at home. He had kept his vow, every single word of it. Success had come, but it arrived quietly, carrying with it a strange emptiness. The hunger was gone, the struggle over, yet something essential was missing. Still, Adewale told himself it was better this way. After all, wealth had never walked away from him. And so, surrounded by riches but guarded by walls he built himself, Adewale stepped into the next chapter of his life, unaware that fate was already preparing someone who would challenge everything he believed. Success without love. At 42, Adewale Thompson had achieved what many could only dream of. His name was known in business circles across Nigeria, and even internationally, for his sharp mind and relentless drive. Newspapers wrote about his rags-to-riches story, and young entrepreneurs looked up to him as a model of perseverance. Yet, Despite all the money, the cars, and the towering offices, he was utterly alone. Adewale had kept the vow he made in that hostel room years ago, never to involve himself with women until he was wealthy. 15 years of discipline, sacrifice, and focus had created a wall around his heart that no one could climb. He avoided relationships, ignored invitations to social gatherings with attractive women, and spent most nights in his home office or at his luxurious apartment overlooking Lagos. Alcohol, once a means to dull the ache of loneliness, had become a constant companion. He drank in moderation at first, but as the years of solitude stretched on, the bottles became a way to numb the longing he refused to acknowledge. Even at his peak, a shadow lingered, a quiet, persistent reminder of the boy who had once loved and lost. People assumed that wealth would make a man happy, that success could fill every void. But Adewale knew the truth. Money could buy comfort, power, and respect, but it could not heal a heart that had been broken. Friends came and went. Associates admired his mind, but never his emotions. Women admired his status, but not the man behind the empire. And he kept his distance, convinced that intimacy was a distraction he could not afford. Even so, there was one presence in his life that had begun to soften the hardness he wore like armor, a woman he never expected, Zanab, his housemaid. Unlike the others, she did not see the billionaire. She saw the man. She respected him, cared for him, and quietly shared the daily rhythms of his life. She knew about his past, his pain, and the boundaries he set. And though Adewale never acted on any feelings, his vow forbidding it, Zainab's presence began to fill a small, unseen corner of his heart. Little did he know, the coming days would test everything he had built, not in business, but in life. And for the first time in 15 years, Adewale would confront a question he had avoided since Kimmy walked away. Could he let someone in again? The maid named Zanab. Zanab was unlike anyone Adewale had ever known. She was a graduate, polite, and impeccably smart, but life had not been easy for her. Before joining Adewale's household, she had faced heartbreak of her own. Her boyfriend had left her, bluntly telling her, "You're just a maid. You're not in my class." The words stung, leaving a scar that made her cautious of men and careful with her heart. She vowed that no one would belittle her again, and she focused on building herself quietly through education and honest work. When she applied to work for Adewale, she expected nothing beyond a job. What she found was a man who treated her with respect, valued her intelligence, and recognized her potential. He did not see her as a servant to be ordered around. He saw her as capable, reliable, and trustworthy. Over time, Zanab became more than a maid. She managed his schedules, organized his appointments, and even attended meetings with him when needed. People who saw them together often assumed they were a couple because she dressed well, spoke intelligently, and carried herself with confidence. Yet, Adewale never touched her. He never crossed the line. Despite her beauty, her diligence, and the subtle warmth in her eyes, he respected the vow he had made to himself 15 years ago. And Zanab, though she quietly admired him, never forced her feelings. She understood the man's discipline and the pain that lingered behind his reserved demeanor. In their shared silence, a subtle bond formed, one built not on romance, but on trust, loyalty, and understanding. Zanab could sense the loneliness behind Adewale's wealth, the weight of his sacrifices, and the pain of his past heartbreak. And in return, Adewale found in Zanab a rare presence, someone who stood by him without expectation, someone who made life a little warmer and less lonely without demanding anything in return. They went about their days together, quietly supporting one another. Adewale trusted her judgment. Zanab admired his determination. To outsiders, they were a power couple. To themselves, they were simply two people navigating the emptiness of success and the shadows of their pasts. And although neither would admit it yet, the threads of destiny were quietly weaving a connection that would soon change both of their lives forever. a professional partnership. Over the years, Zanab proved herself indispensable to Adewale. She was no longer just a housemaid. She had become his confidant, his assistant, and, in many ways, the person who kept the household and his life running smoothly. Her intelligence, calm demeanor, and sharp judgment earned Adewale's unwavering trust. He began to involve her in matters beyond the home. When he had meetings with investors, Zanab accompanied him, taking notes, organizing documents, and even offering advice when needed. Colleagues and business partners were often impressed, some even surprised, that a maid could hold her own in such high-stakes settings. But Adewale knew her value. She had a mind as capable as his own, and he had learned to rely on her without hesitation. Despite their professional closeness, Adewale remained careful. He did not allow familiarity to turn into intimacy. Zanab noticed this, but never felt discouraged. Instead, she admired his discipline and respected his boundaries. She understood that the man who had built a billionaire empire had done so at great personal cost. To her, he deserved the respect she willingly gave. People around them began to whisper. When they were seen together outside the office, Zanab's elegant attire, polished appearance, and confident presence made it easy for outsiders to assume they were a couple. Sometimes, Adewale even played along subtly, using the appearance of companionship as a shield against nosy acquaintances. But their bond was more than appearances. In their daily routines, a quiet understanding grew between them. Zanab anticipated Adewale's needs before he asked. Adewale, in turn, noticed her small sacrifices, the way she worked late without complaint, how she smiled even when tired, how she always offered encouragement without expecting anything in return. There was trust, there was loyalty, and though neither would admit it aloud, a deeper connection was forming, one that would eventually surpass friendship, loyalty, and duty. Yet, life has a way of testing even the strongest of bonds. And unbeknownst to them, the years of careful professionalism and silent admiration were about to collide with something unforeseen, an event that would challenge both their hearts and their lives in ways they could never have imagined. Untouched, but connected. Even as the years passed, Adewale and Zanab's relationship remained a delicate balance between closeness and distance. They shared long days in the office, evenings reviewing contracts, and countless small moments that only the two of them truly understood. Yet, despite the warmth and trust that existed between them, Adewale never touched her, never crossed the line, never allowed familiarity to turn into intimacy. Zanab noticed it immediately, and though her heart often ached with desire, she never pushed. She had learned, through years of rejection and disappointment, the importance of patience and respect. She understood that Adewale's silence, his restraint, and even his occasional coldness were not signs of rejection, but shields forged from the pain of his past. There were subtle signs of his care, though. The way he remembered her favorite tea, how he noticed when she was tired, or how he quietly asked for her opinion on things that no one else would question her about. These small gestures were enough to make her heart flutter, even as she reminded herself to stay disciplined. And Adewale, for his part, recognized her presence in ways he could not always name. He felt the comfort of her company during lonely nights in his mansion, the reassurance she offered without words, and the unwavering loyalty that had never wavered even when the world around him whispered of riches, power, and temptation. He admired her, respected her, and perhaps, though he would never admit it, depended on her more than he could articulate. The tension between them was palpable but unspoken. Friends who visited often commented on how they looked like a couple, though neither of them gave the slightest encouragement. There was a quiet electricity in the air whenever they were together, a connection deeper than duty, yet restrained by vows, past pains, and unspoken rules. In many ways, their relationship was a paradox. Untouched yet deeply connected, professional yet profoundly personal. They were partners in life's practicalities, but strangers to each other's hearts, at least on the surface. Little did they know, the coming events would shatter that fragile balance. Life, as it often does, was about to force them into a situation where silence, loyalty, and restraint would no longer be enough. And when that moment came, they would be tested in ways that neither money, discipline, nor years of self-control could have prepared them for. The sudden illness. It started quietly, small lapses in energy that Adewale brushed off as fatigue. But within weeks, the symptoms worsened. Weakness clung to him like a shadow. Mornings became harder than nights, and even simple tasks left him breathless. At first, he ignored it. Wealth had taught him that problems could be solved with resources, not vulnerability. He continued attending meetings, signing contracts, and maintaining the image of a successful, unstoppable billionaire. But his body had begun sending urgent warnings that no money could silence. One evening, after returning from a particularly long board meeting, Adewale collapsed in his living room. Panic surged through the household. Zanab, who had been in the adjacent office preparing documents, rushed to his side. Sir, stay with me," she cried, fear rising in her voice. Paramedics were called immediately, and Adewale was rushed to one of the top hospitals in Lagos. Through the chaos, Zanab never left his side. She held his hand tightly in the ambulance, whispering encouragement even as tears ran down her cheeks. At the hospital, the doctors ran a battery of tests. Hours passed, tense and silent, until the verdict came. Both of Adewale's kidneys were failing. Years of heavy drinking, his way of numbing loneliness and avoiding emotional vulnerability, had exacted a heavy price. Without immediate surgery and a strict treatment plan, his life was at serious risk. For the first time in years, Adewale felt powerless. Money, influence, and status could not save him from his own body. His carefully controlled world had collapsed in a matter of weeks. Through it all, Zanab stayed. She slept beside him in the hospital bed, cleaned him, and whispered prayers. She reminded him to hold on, to fight, to survive. Her loyalty, unwavering and genuine, became his anchor in the storm. In those moments of weakness, as machines beeped and nurses moved around him, Adewale realized something profound. Zanab was no longer just a companion or assistant. She was the one constant in a world that had let him down so many times. And as he waited for the doctors to prepare him for surgery, a quiet, unspoken thought began to take shape in his mind, a thought that would forever alter the course of both their lives. The maid who never left. Adewale's condition grew more serious by the hour. The hospital was filled with the sterile smell of antiseptic, the steady beep of monitors, and the murmurs of doctors and nurses. But through it all, there was one constant presence, Zanab. She never left his side. She slept on a small chair beside his bed, waking every few minutes to check his pulse, adjust his blankets, or hold his hand when the pain made him wince. She cried silently when no one was watching, whispered prayers, and spoke words of encouragement he could barely hear over the machines. "Sir, you will be okay," she whispered, her forehead pressed against his arm. "You have fought too hard to leave us now. Please be strong." Her eyes, red from exhaustion and worry, never wavered from his face. She reminded him of the years they had shared in silence, the trust they had built, and the loyalty she had shown when no one else cared. For Adewale, the sight of her tears was both comforting and terrifying, a stark reminder that someone truly cared for him, without judgment, without expectation. As the doctors prepared him for the high-risk surgery, Adewale realized he might not survive. His body ached, his mind raced, and fear he had long ignored crept in. And in that fragile moment, he made a decision, a request that shocked even him. "Doctor," he whispered, his voice weak but steady. "Before the operation, please, I need my semen extracted." The doctor blinked, slightly startled but professional, and nodded. explaining the procedure. Adewale then turned to Zanab, who had been quietly holding his hand through every step. "Zanab," he said, voice trembling, if I don't make it, I want you to have my child. Please carry my child for me." Zanab froze. Her eyes widened in shock, tears already brimming. She had expected to care for him, to comfort him, but never this. Never to be entrusted with the continuation of his legacy. "Sir, I don't know what to say," she stammered, her hand tightening around his. He smiled faintly, a mixture of pain, hope, and trust. "You've always been by my side. I trust you more than anyone. If I don't survive, at least a part of me will live on through you." Zanab nodded, her heart racing, her mind filled with questions, fear, and determination. She understood the gravity of his request and, more importantly, the trust it carried. In that moment, surrounded by hospital machines and the tension of life and death, a bond was sealed. A bond stronger than wealth, stronger than fear, stronger than any vow or rule. She would carry his child, and nothing would ever be the same again. The shocking request. The hospital room was quiet, save for the rhythmic beeping of monitors and the hushed footsteps of nurses. Adewale lay on the bed, pale and weak, but his mind was clearer than it had been in years. He had made his decision, and the weight of it pressed heavily on both him and Zanab. "Zanab," he whispered, his voice barely audible but filled with determination, "please, I need you to help me. Carry my child. Make sure a part of me lives on, even if I don't." Zanab's hands shook as she held his. She could feel the tremor in his body, the fragility of the man she had watched fight life and death with silent courage. Her heart raced, part fear, part awe, part the realization of the enormous trust he was placing in her. I will do it, sir," she said softly, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face. "I'll do whatever it takes." The doctors prepared Adewale for the procedure. With precise professionalism, they explained the extraction process and assured him everything would be handled safely. Adewale, lying weak but resolute, gave a faint nod, trusting the procedure to medical hands. But even more, trusting Zanab to honor his final request. Zanab stayed by his side the entire time. She watched as the extraction was done, holding his hand, whispering words of encouragement and silently praying. The moment felt surreal. A billionaire at the height of his power, facing mortality, and placing the future of his lineage in the hands of the woman who had quietly served him for years. After the procedure, Adewale rested, exhausted but alive. Zanab, though overwhelmed, felt a strange sense of purpose and honor. She had been entrusted with something extraordinary, something that went beyond duty or loyalty. She would carry his legacy forward, even in the face of uncertainty. Weeks later, after recovery from surgery, Zanab underwent IVF using the extracted sample. The process was delicate, demanding patience, and filled with emotional highs and lows. But Zanab endured every step, thinking of Adewale, thinking of the trust he had placed in her, and thinking of the life growing inside her, a life that was, in a way, a bridge between two souls who had silently cared for each other for years. When she returned to the hospital to see Adewale, her belly already beginning to show, he smiled faintly at her. His survival was nothing short of a miracle. And now, in addition to being alive, he saw before him a living symbol of hope, trust, and a bond that no amount of wealth could define. "You've done this for me," he said softly, his eyes glistening. "And I will never forget it. I promise you, Zanab, I will make this right." In that moment, the balance between duty, loyalty, and love shifted. What had started as a shocking request had now blossomed into the beginning of a life-changing connection, one that neither Adewale nor Zanab could have anticipated, yet both would soon come to cherish. A child of hope. Months passed, and Zanab's pregnancy became a living reminder of the promise she had fulfilled. Every day, as she cared for herself and the life growing inside her. She felt a profound connection to Adewale, not just as her employer, but as the man whose trust and vulnerability had changed both their lives forever. Adewale, now fully recovered from his surgery, watched her with a mixture of awe, gratitude, and something he had not felt in decades: soft, protective affection. The once lonely billionaire, hardened by heartbreak and years of discipline, found himself drawn to Zanab in ways that money, power, and ambition had never allowed. He attended every doctor's appointment with her, holding her hand through ultrasounds, nervously asking questions about the baby's health, and marveling at the life they had created together. For the first time in his life, he felt complete, not through wealth or achievement, but through connection, care, and shared responsibility. Zanab, in turn, began to see a side of Adewale few ever witnessed: tender, patient, and deeply human. She remembered the boy he once was in the university, the man who had been broken by love, and now the man who had risen against impossible odds. And in their shared glances, quiet laughter, and mutual support, a bond stronger than any contract or obligation quietly blossomed. The world around them seemed to fade. There were no whispers of gossip, no judgment about roles or status. In the quiet of his home, with the baby growing inside her, love began to bloom naturally, slowly, and undeniably. Adewale, who had spent so many years avoiding intimacy, now found himself longing for closeness, to hold Zanab, to reassure her, and to be near the child that represented not just hope, but a future he had once thought impossible. For Zanab, carrying his child was no longer simply a fulfillment of a promise. It had become a journey of mutual trust, shared dreams, and the quiet realization that their lives, once defined by solitude and discipline, were now intertwined in ways neither could have imagined. And as her belly grew round with life, both of them understood something profound. This child was more than a legacy. It was a second chance at love, trust, and happiness, a chance to rewrite the stories they had carried in their hearts for so many years. First love rekindled. The house was quiet that evening, bathed in the warm glow of the sunset filtering through the tall windows. Zanab rested on the couch, her hands gently cradling the growing life within her, while Adewale sat beside her, silently watching her. For the first time in years, the air between them was free of restraint. There were no formalities, no unspoken barriers, just two hearts, one hardened by loss, the other cautious but loyal, slowly opening to something neither had allowed themselves to feel before: love. Adewale reached out, hesitating only a moment before brushing a strand of hair from Zanab's face. Her eyes met his, wide with surprise, and then softened with trust. She had been with him through sickness and recovery, through fear and hope, and now she realized how deeply he had come to rely on her, not just as a maid or assistant, but as a partner in life. I don't want to lose you," Adewale admitted quietly, his voice raw with emotion. "Not now, not ever." Zainab's heart raced. She reached for him, placing her hand over his, feeling the warmth that contrasted with the years of distance and discipline. "You won't lose me," she whispered. "I'm here always." And in that moment, the invisible walls they had built around their hearts crumbled. Their first kiss was gentle, hesitant, and filled with the weight of years spent apart from true connection. It carried gratitude, relief, and the tender bloom of affection that had been simmering between them for so long. One kiss led to another, slower, deeper, as if each touch was a silent apology for the years of loneliness they had endured. When they finally pulled away, both were breathless, hearts pounding, and aware that everything had changed. The love they had silently nurtured had finally found its voice. Adewale, who had spent a lifetime avoiding women to protect himself, now realized that love could be both a risk and a reward, and that with Zanab, it was worth everything. Zanab, once cautious and reserved, understood that trust, patience, and devotion had led them to this moment. A moment where their bond transformed from loyalty and duty into romance, passion, and undeniable connection. And as they sat together that evening, hands entwined and hearts aligned, both knew that life would never be the same again. They had survived loss, pain, and years of self-imposed isolation, and now they were ready to embrace love fully, without fear, without restraint. The child growing in Zanab's womb was no longer just a promise of legacy. It was a living testament to a love reborn, a symbol of two souls finally finding their way back to each other, happily ever after. The day finally came when the house was filled with laughter, warmth, and celebration. Zanab, now heavily pregnant, glowed with joy, and Adewale stood beside her, proud, devoted, and deeply in love. The journey from heartbreak, loneliness, and hardship to this moment of happiness had been long and difficult, but every struggle had led them here. Before the birth, Adewale took a bold step. He went to meet Zanab's family. With humility, respect, and gratitude, he asked for their blessing. They saw the sincerity in his eyes, the love he held for Zanab, and the devotion he had shown. With tears of joy, they gave their approval, welcoming him as the man who would stand by their daughter's side for life. When the child was born, the house was filled with more than just the cries of a newborn. It was filled with hope, fulfillment, and the promise of a new beginning. Adewale held his child in his arms, feeling a mixture of pride, gratitude, and amazement. This tiny life was the living embodiment of the trust, loyalty, and love that had blossomed between him and Zanab. In the weeks that followed, the couple grew closer, their bond deepening with each shared smile, tender touch, and quiet conversation. Finally, they celebrated a private wedding, surrounded by family and friends, solidifying their union not only as lovers, but as partners in life. For Adewale, the journey from a heartbroken young man to a billionaire, and now to a devoted husband and father, had taught him the value of patience, loyalty, and love. For Zanab, the years of trust, care, and devotion had blossomed into a life she had never imagined, filled with love, respect, and joy. Together, they built a home filled with laughter, warmth, and the knowledge that life's hardest battles often lead to the most beautiful victories. And so, Adewale, Zanab, and their child lived happily ever after, a story of resilience, trust, love, and the power of faith in one another. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe and share for more amazing videos. Your support means the world, and there's more incredible content on the way.